Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I pay tribute to the member for securing this debate. World Press Freedom Day, it is appropriate that we should celebrate it, and it is appropriate because it's fundamental to our democracy. It's a basic right. We all know that knowledge is power, and equally its absence also endangers us. Press freedom allows us to expose totalitarianism, often in the face of danger, as other members have commented on. I myself was privileged to know James Pringle, who returned to my old constituency to vote in the Scottish referendum back in 2014, who regaled me with tales about first having served in the Dominican coup and then having been the first Western journalist into Cambodia under Pol Pot after the atrocities of the Khmer Rouge. I pay tribute to his courage. It is also vital for democracy. I remember reading Professor Henry Milner in his book Civic Literacy, that's a study about what motivates turnout in elections. And a critical factor isn't whether it's as easy to vote as being able to buy a tin of beans in a supermarket. What matters in particular is also the understanding, and a quality media is fundamental to that. If people don't understand the issues, then they will not participate and vote. It's a factor normally shown in this country why turnouts are higher in referenda, when there's a clearer understanding about what the issues are, rather than perhaps in wider elections where turnout can be significantly lower. There are obviously, as other members have correctly said, ongoing issues, whether in Saudi Arabia, whether in Belarus, whether indeed closer at home with Julian Assange. I sympathise and agree with the points made by others across the political divide that these people require to be protected. I also listened with interest, and I think the member moving the debate was correct to point out the changes that have happened in the media. I have been writing for the Scottish media for several years now, and the decline is significant. There are actions that we have to take to address that and to protect those valuable newspapers who are undermined by other platforms. Equally, we should also remember that social media is now just as important in many instances as the mainstream media. We have looked at this country and what happened in the Arab Spring. It wasn't the mainstream media that was actually the outlet to let people know, both within those countries that were part of the Arab Spring, but to let the wider world know. It wasn't those papers that were held by the regimes. It was social media, bloggers, just people tweeting, Facebook pages or whatever else. The member for Folkestone was right to warn about dangers, disinformation and challenges that we have to take as a society to protect our democracy. Equally, we also have to remember that it's important that we support that. That takes me on to my own situation within my own jurisdiction of Scotland. It's many years since I first studied law, and I've had 20 years both practising as a lawyer and 7.5 years as Justice Secretary. I never thought I would face a situation where I was condemnatory of actions that have been happening against the press in my own country. Since the days of learning about HME v Gordon Ayres, I always assumed that those who were seeking to put forward information that was appropriate and fair would be protected. And yet in Scotland, in the fallout to the Alex Salmond affair, we have seen Mark Hurst, a journalist, prosecuted, the case rightly rejected by the presiding sheriff in the Borders, and a case in which he was supported by the NUJ. We have seen Craig Murray, a blogger, indeed a former British senior civil servant, now facing a prison sentence of 8 months, something that not only is shocking in itself but also drives a coach and horses through a position brought in by the Scottish Government that there would be presumption against a sentence of imprisonment for less than a year. Their absence of criticism, their failure to comment has in fact been quite shocking. And it's not simply those cases brought by the Crown, it's been cases that have been pursued by the police, where people so much as tweeting anything that might be seen as possibly identifying a witness have faced a knock on the door from the police. That is fundamentally damaging to Scottish democracy. It's not what I expect, and it hasn't come about by happen chance. It has been deliberate, it has been targeted, it has been driven by the Crown Office. If we are to have a free press, then there has to be free reporting. That has to apply to bloggers as much as it applies to the mainstream press. That people have been charged in Scottish courts and have faced now possible terms of imprisonment for simply doing exactly the same as the mainstream press has done, but not faced prosecution, is simply unacceptable. There's also a reason that I am required to raise it here, because the position of the Lord Advocate in Scotland is no longer tenable. There has to be a separation of powers of having one individual who is both the legal adviser to the Scottish Government and also the head of the prosecution service in Scotland. That is no longer appropriate. I am disappointed that the First Minister didn't seek to make it more faster. It's something that has to come back to this chamber as I conclude, Madam Chair, because as a result of the 1998 Scotland Act, the Lord Advocate is in fact enshrined in statute by this Parliament here. Action has to be taken here as well as in Holyrood.
Thank you, and I must remind members not to comment on any live cases.